session of this Decarbonisation Summit 2022. You are the elite, those who are still here, because you're here, so that shows stamina, but also we have a fantastic panel lined up for you. And genuinely, from all the discussions I've had over the last couple of days, these guys are raring to go. So I'm really pleased that you're here in the audience. People are watching online at home, but it's worth bearing in mind that this is one of those evergreen sessions, so it will live online, and I hope other people will have the opportunity to catch up at it at some stage. Oh, my mic's just been turned on. Does that sound okay? Am I okay now? Great. So, without any further ado, because I want to give them as much opportunity to talk as possible, let me introduce you to the panel. Starting furthest out to my left is Eunice Maybe, who is Energy Optimization Director at SSE Energy Solutions. Next to her, Adam Norris, founder of Pure Electric. Sitting to the right of him is James Scott, who's Director of Behaviour Change at Cycling UK. Julian Scriven is here with his bike. He's the Managing Director at Brompton Bikes. And then probably someone who doesn't need much of an introduction, Dame Sarah Story, Britain's most decorated athlete and the Active Travel England Commissioner for Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So welcome all of you. Before we start, James is going to just say a few words to open up the discussion for us. Over to you.
Thanks very much. I'm gonna stand up for this. I've got a little speech prepared. So yeah, my name's James Scott. I'm the Director of Behaviour Change at Cycling UK, and I'm a behaviour scientist. And I've just prepared a little 5-minute speech about how behaviour science and behaviour change can really unlock an active travel nation and the things we need to look at that drive behaviour, such as a cycling behaviour. So there's 3 things that drive a cycling behaviour, and they're attitudes, social norms, and self-efficacy. And within 4 minutes, I'm going to hopefully digest those for you really, really quickly. So attitudes are really, really important within psychology and really, really important within behaviour change. So attitudes come out through our thoughts and through how we speak and through our words. And they're also embedded within our beliefs, as in what is true to us and what we believe. So they're really rooted in who we are and our identity. So if we have a built environment that is not conducive towards cycling, this can be expressed through our words, such as cycling just isn't safe in my area, I'm in with the traffic, it's not segregated, I'm not going to do it. So it's expressed through our words, and that can lead into our thought patterns and our cognition, and then that can install a belief that we just think cycling is just not for us. However, if we build a network of cycling networks and cycle lanes and an environment that is conducive towards cycling, that can have a real positive effect on our attitudes. And again, this can be expressed through our thoughts, such as, it's great, cycling segregated, I'm not mixed in with the cars, I feel really confident, I'll go for a bike ride. This can feed into cognition and how we think about cycling, and then this can feed into our beliefs that we think cycling is actually a viable transport option for us. So the built environment is actually a really strong psychological tool to get us cycling more. But behaviour is really, really complex, and psychology is really quite complex as well. So we can't just rely on the built environment, we have to rely on softer measures as well. But we need a 360 approach when we look at a behaviour. So sometimes with attitudes, we need softer measures such as social marketing. That gives us information about how to access skills and things that are based around value proposition. If you do value proposition that's linked to environmental values and your fitness values, you can get people cycling, you have attitudinal change there. But it's not just about hard measures and soft measures separated, it's about bringing them together. And the next thing I mentioned was social norms. And social norms, again, is really important within behaviour change, and society really dictates what we do within behaviour. And again, if we build cycle networks and an environment that is really conducive towards cycling, that will build a social norm. If we see people within our community cycling, that will make it socially acceptable for you to get on a bike and cycle as well. But once again, behaviour is really, really complex, and we can't just rely on the built environment to drive social change. We have to have really robust, interesting social marketing as well. That shows every facet of society cycling. So we need males, females on bikes, pictures, people from different ethnicities, young, old, in ordinary clothing, and not wearing helmets as well. So we need to show that cycling is socially acceptable, and that will drive social change and social norms. And the last thing I mentioned is self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is just a fancy word in psychology for skills, but it's really rooted in what we believe is our confidence and what we believe our skills are or aren't. So again, the built environment can really drive self-efficacy when it comes to creating a cycling behaviour. So self-efficacy is internal and it's external as well. So once again, if we have a built environment that is really conducive towards cycling, that can make us feel confident, and it can make people have so high self-efficacy for them to jump on a bike and go for a ride. And we can also gain self-efficacy vicariously. So if we watch people in our community riding a bike, that will drive our self-efficacy up, it will make us feel confident, and we'll get on a bike and go for a ride. But once again, behaviour is complex. So we need the softer measures there as well. So quite often, one-to-one training is really helpful for self-efficacy, and information on how to access cycle skills, where your cycle network is, showing that it's a conjoined up cycle network in a city will help drive self-efficacy as well. So to create a cycling behaviour, it's not just about having hard measures and soft measures and having them separated. It's about having a 360 approach for cycling that will really drive a behaviour. So to get the nation active on bikes, we need to have attitudes that are pro towards cycling, social norms that really drive cycling, and self-efficacy that builds people confidence and having a space for them to jump on a bike and go for a ride. And that is how we'll get people cycling.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, James. And what a fabulous introduction to the whole discussion.
Right.
And I suppose when we're talking about active travel, it's not just bikes, but bikes are a really, really important part of it. And Adam, I wanted to just ask you, in general, we saw this huge surge in people getting on bikes during lockdown because the roads were quiet again. I'm assuming the numbers have gone right back down. What's happened from your perspective?
They have dropped somewhat. Sorry, just reflecting on the question. They have dropped. I think what we've seen is a gradual increase. We go back to 2 years ago, we're up on that point. People tried it, and some people stuck with it, and some people didn't, it's the truth. I think what we need to go back to is, and when speaking to people, they felt safe when there was no cars on. I was speaking to somebody else in the audience earlier who was saying they felt safe when there's no cars. Now they don't, and I think we need to invest more in the safety and the education to get people out there and make them feel comfortable with it.
Yeah. Eunice, your speciality is data around all of this. So what's the data telling you about cycling numbers at the moment?
I think because of the cost of if we need to change the infrastructure and where we're going to put things, data is absolutely key. We need to make sure that we're using it correctly. So we have a number of sensors where we're measuring traffic, whether that's cars, people, bikes, so we can help local authorities determine where they put the cycle paths, where is actually people, where they're walking, are cycling taking a shortcut that we didn't think about. So there's evidence-based decisions through data. It's not people just thinking they know where the best place is. You know, like I said, there's a lot of investment through the council, so how do you make sure that that investment is correct, the cycle paths are in the right place, and everyone's engaged within that programme.
And are you seeing particular parts of the country where there is much more engagement with this kind of travel?
Yes, we've had quite a lot in Cornwall, actually. We're doing a lot of studies in that area, looking at people, cycles and transport, very much linked to air quality as well. I mean, when we're talking about decarbonisation, the importance of air quality, I don't know if people remember, but in 2020 there was the court ruling about the young lady that unfortunately died. That was linked to air quality.
Yeah.
So again, if we're getting more people back into active travel, it's beneficial. The health benefits as well as the carbon benefits are fantastic. Yeah. And that's what we need to think about as well.
So we were talking earlier, and I was saying that I'd come across some kind of picture on Twitter of a picture of the centre of Paris, and it was full of bikes on a main route through the centre of Paris, and the comment was, Paris did not look like this 2 years ago, but they have made phenomenal strides in a very short space of time. How have they done it?
Well, they identified that there was an absolutely huge number of very, very short car journeys being made within the city, and that all of those journeys could easily be transferred onto foot or bike. And as a result, they just shut streets. And they changed the number of car parking spaces. They removed a number of them to make the space they needed for the segregated infrastructure. It's actually really interesting because when you bring that narrative back here, that's how we're making the decisions with our councils here in Greater Manchester. We've got the data that shows where the shortest of car journeys are being made and where the highest propensity to cycle or walk would be. And therefore, that's where we need to focus our efforts on trying to do something a little bit like Paris has done. We're not going to necessarily be able to do it quite so quickly, but they do have that huge thing coming, which is going to be as close to our home games again as possible, because the Paris Games has a huge economic option for them in the future.
Do you think we missed out on an opportunity back in 2012 then?
We actually created a huge low traffic neighbourhood with that Olympic Park, and if you go back there, the network of, the network of streets and the way that it's laid out is incredibly positive. But I think it's the way Paris is and the way that they have their venues, they have a huge incentive to get it right. And Ángel Dargo is really, really focused on that. And you just see the number of people now out on bikes, on scooters, walking, and it's a much more pleasant environment because they really focused on taking those short car journeys off the road.
We have to acknowledge there's public resistance. So there's public resistance to people getting on bikes, there's public resistance to cycle paths being created. I hear it all the time from our audience. I hear it from taxi drivers who complain about it loudly. The occasional time I go down to London, they're forever giving out about the roads being cut up, Julian. So how do you win the public opinion argument?
I mean, it's not easy, and I think a lot of the points that have just been raised now are the keys to it. One of them is data, and it's evidencing and doing evidence-backed decisions. And I won't mention the local authority that I've been working with, but they were putting in a cycle lane for the sake of putting in a cycle lane, without any data to actually back up that it was a good idea. Now, great, more cycle lanes is fantastic, unless all they're doing is actually creating something that's not going to get used. If you start with the data and you evidence there's a good place to put it, then people will back it. But crucially then, there does need to be political courage. And that is certainly present in Manchester. Anthony Burnham is famously courageous when it comes to things like this. But, you know, it's very easy when a noisy minority band together and do these Twitter storms against politicians who are pro-cycling. We've seen it. Ealing Borough Council, the local borough for Brompton. Julian Bell, who was a massive cycling advocate, was literally hounded out of office over LTNs because a small minority managed to cause such a fervour over something that actually the data showed was doing good.
Yeah, I used to live in Ealing actually, and my children, when they were very small, went to a school right bang on a main road. And I mean, we're lucky now to live in rural Cheshire, but goodness knows the kind of pollution that was generated around there that you've also referred to, Eunice, as well. Yeah, James, sorry, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think Julian covered the points really well there. You know, we need the political will there, and we're seeing it in areas in Manchester, certainly in London. 27% of trips are completed by bike now in London, which is great, but they have a really strong infrastructure there as well. It goes back to what I was talking about before about those social norms and building that self-efficacy as well. So that comes from the groundswell, and it comes from people and individuals, but we have to have the political will there. A macro level from government, which is there now in some way, shape or form, but also at a local level as well. We need pro-cycling policies.
Yeah. Adam, well, I said it's not just about bikes. How would you describe the kind of bigger picture of active travel from an electric perspective, perhaps?
I think, sorry, lots of things. One of the things we were discussing earlier was that one of the problems with active travel, and where Brompton is brilliant, and I think actually should be doing a better job across the globe, is that we've done a recent survey, 50% of people had nowhere to store a bicycle at home or at work. And one of my big things is that I think as a government and a country, we're doing the wrong thing. We should be actually trying to help and put money into investing in people like them to develop better products, because then that would mean that's what we need. We can't change every block of flats, every tower block. We can't go and change every shop and suddenly put a place to store a bike. The level of investment required to help people like Brompton or ourselves build new products, that's the way we need to be doing. So I think active travel, one of the biggest problems is just simply where do you store a bike? You know, active travel is also walking.
Yeah. We can create opportunities for better bike storage by reallocating parking spaces. So one parking space will potentially store 20 bikes if we get it right. So when we're looking for solutions, we have to look around the environment, and instead of constantly providing for motor vehicles, provide for other modes as well. And that also means when we come into the electric space, that when we're putting charging points in the right place is never on the footway, because we should never be inconveniencing pedestrians any more than they already are. And one of the big things about the whole agenda for active travel is making sure that we spread the inconvenience of a journey around. Because at the moment, over the past 50 odd years or so, we've prioritised the flow of vehicles because the most important journey apparently was the person who was in that particular vehicle. But if you come off a train and you end up waiting, 3 or 4 minutes to cross a really busy road, you're much less likely to make the final part of your journey on foot, even if it's only a few hundred metres in all. You're much more likely to jump in a vehicle to make that journey. So by spreading this inconvenience, ensuring that we create the infrastructure that's relevant in the right place. So in the roadway for those electric charging points, if we're going to have electric vehicles, putting bike parking hangers in parking spaces, and making sure that we provide for everybody in a much more equal way. And I think that's one of the ways that we can start to see that modal shift.
Yeah, and Adam, I'm also interested, the point you were making earlier about just encouraging people to give it a go. Actually, you can have all the cycle lanes you want, but you're not going to fill them if people are just reluctant to sit on a bike.
Yeah. That bit, and I would, anyone in the audience who wants to, we've got shops across the UK, and one of them, we stock Brompton, we stock other people's products, is to try them. We actually pay people cash to try a bike. We've got to be a bit careful, but that's what we do, because we know that they're more likely to purchase. And it's that bit about how do you get them on, how do you suddenly go, wow, I feel safe, this is really good fun. So therefore, that's what we're trying to do, and anyone here, I'd love to help. I set this business up to try and help the planet, and I really appreciate everything we're doing here at this conference, because the planet needs it. But that's what I put, just so I put 58 million in so far to my business to try and help improve this planet. And so anyone that wants it, I will subsidise bikes and let people try them and run trial schemes for people to try and get more people to try them.
Take him up on that offer. Although I suspect we're sort of preaching to the converted here in a way. But, go on, Julian.
Yeah, so I mean, what a lot of people don't realise is the Brompton Bike Hire, which one of the things I look after, was set up 10 years ago with exactly that in mind. And Will, who's our chief exec, knew it was the right thing to do without necessarily knowing why. We've started to pull down into the data now, and the thing that's really fascinating is 1 in 3 people join Brompton Hire to try cycling as part of their life, because they can have a bike for 3, 4, 5 days. So they can experience the good and the bad of being a multimodal traveller. But the thing that's really interesting, which we only really figured out in the last 12 months, is 1 in 4 are going on to buy a bike within a year. Not necessarily a Brompton, but a bike. And that's telling us exactly what Adam's saying. If you get people on the bikes, then you'll get a good conversion rate. And we've got this highfalutin thing about changing the way people move around cities, because of course we're business, we have to, it's about bums on bikes. If we get bums on bikes, 1 in 4 will become someone who uses a bicycle as a mode of transport. I won't use the C word, cyclist, because we're not looking to convert people into cyclists. We're looking to transfer the way people travel, because if we change that, we will decarbonise. We won't actually decarbonise by getting a load of sports cyclists going out on the weekend. We will decarbonise by getting people using electric bikes, regular bikes, as modes of transport.
And scooters, where does that fit into the picture? Anyone?
I'll do scooters, but just that point about, so I think and again, I don't know everyone's facts, but we spend a lot of money on new bike lanes, and actually there's a lot of people who would ride if they just tried it. And actually from an investment perspective and a return, if we're really genuine about decarbonisation, and I don't mind whether it's us as a gentleman here that owns a bike shop, speaking to earlier, or them, anyone, if the government supported more trying to try bikes, we'd just get a load of people on them and get a load of people out of cars really quickly. And I think it'd be the best return the government can make. Putting in, like I say, ripping out lots of roads, I agree with it, but the cost is huge, and it's a much lower cost of acquisition to get people out of cars, I think, is getting people to just try a bike. And I think the scooter thing is, that point, my bike business is half electric bikes and half scooters. We're in France, UK and Spain. And over there, we do a lot more scooters. And I see that being it's not, the question is, I'm actually going to Loughborough University after this now to understand the calorific use while you're scooting, because you end up going with bent legs, there's vibration, and it's a bit like being on a hover plate slightly. So it's not as easy as just standing still. And we're just trying to understand how close it is to active transport. Is it the same as being completely passive, or where does it fit? But why they're taking off so massively across, now they're outselling bicycles, and actually if you're worried about decarbonisation, in France and in Paris, they're outselling bicycles just simply because it's such an affordable form of transport at £300 or £400, that sort of level. And this point that they can't store a conventional bike.
No, and it's worth saying, it's still in this country, you are not allowed to ride a private e-scooter on public roads.
1 year to go.
You're not allowed to. You are allowed to in the trial areas, but not outside of those. Have you ever been on an electric scooter?
No, I haven't.
You don't fancy it? Then,
no, I'm quite welded to my bike. But I think one of the things that's really important to know, we know in Greater Manchester 75% of households don't have access to a bike, and that's one of the impetuses behind the B-Bike network. So it's being rolled out across some key areas at the moment, and there's more bikes coming over the summer. But one of the great ways to enable people to have access to a bike is to have those public accessed bikes. So you can do it via the app, you can have short journeys, and the business case that was put together is far exceeding itself already, especially along the Oxford Road corridor here. So if while you're in Manchester, if you're not already a resident, you've not seen our yellow bikes, they're absolutely brilliant. They're great fun, actually quite lightweight as well. Because one of the challenges people always come back to is, it's just a bit too heavy for me, because I just don't feel fit enough, but I'd really like to have a go. And you always say that it's not just about cycling. When we want to get more people into cycling, sometimes we actually start with enabling them to walk. So a 10-minute walk, a 15-minute walk, and building up their confidence to be fit enough. Because we were talking about self-efficacy at the start, if people don't feel fit enough and they feel a bit overawed, where do we start? And that's why it's really important that we never ever stop talking about walking, because walking is the first thing that everybody hopefully does in the morning. And ideally, we want them to walk past the vehicle and onto a bus stop or onto a bike station and pick up another active form or another version of sustainable transport all the way to their destination.
You're talking very much about cities, big metropolitan areas. You and I live out in the sticks, right? So I have no public transport accessible to us, and I can't cycle into work. I'm not doing it at 4 a.m. in the morning, sorry. So how do you, I mean, obviously for pleasure, of course, there's that, but how do you encourage more active travel out in the countryside?
Well, electric bikes are brilliant for going slightly longer distances and trying to get to that transport hub, so getting to the slightly bigger place that may have access to a station, for example, that then will bring you into suburbia where there are those other options. But equally, we have to recognise there are certain jobs that need a vehicle, and we're not trying to eradicate vehicles. No. They're very useful in the right way. What we're looking at and what we're trying to focus on is those 250 million car journeys of a kilometre or less that are done in Greater Manchester every year. And there's over 40,000 tonnes of carbon will be saved if we can convert those journeys to an active version. So we can be rest assured that provided we get to those stations eventually or use our electric bikes when we can, it's trying to make those journeys within the urban environment. That's the focus.
And it feels like that really should be achievable.
It should be.
Yeah, well, I know you're doing your best effort to make sure it happens. James, we've talked a bit about the role of government and then obviously the role of kind of devolved authorities as well. But what about the role of businesses in encouraging their workforce? I know there's a lot more work from home, we've talked about that, but where there is still travel to work. Yeah,
they play a huge part of that. So yeah, I mean, transport is a big emitter of greenhouse gases, and if we look at actual driving behaviour, 68% of people drive to work, which is a huge percentage, and workplaces really need to take ownership of that and drive that decarbonisation along, and they need to offer incentives, they need to look at bike share schemes that they can integrate within their workplace. So workplaces should absolutely be looking at how they can take part of that and be part of the solution.
Does that have to be more than just a, what do you call that cycle thing that you
Cycle to work scheme.
Cycle to work scheme.
Yeah, that's one option there, but I think they need to look at other options as well.
Put your bike.
As Adam said, there has to be places to park. There has to be a network which is you can get out your door in the front morning, and you know that your cycle network will take you from your house to your station if you're travelling by train. So the trains have to have a good interface with cycling, or it has to go right the way to the front door where you're working. So going to that self-efficacy as well.
Yeah.
So it's
or just making parking prohibitively expensive, which is something that's happened in our place of work.
That drives behaviour change. Incentivising things or taxing will drive behaviour change.
A little bit of stick, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Eunice.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say making it easy, really. So making sure there are showers, there's lockers. If you've invested in an expensive bike, are you happy with the way you're storing it? Safety, are you happy on that route? I know we talked about clothing and how that can be safe, but absolutely, and even going into sort of like the carbonisation, I mean, commuting emissions is part of Scope 3, so there's about 15 different elements to Scope 3, and people are focusing on 1 and 2 because it's easy, but actually commuting is part of that, so we do have to capture that information, so the more that we can turn that to active travel and encourage people to come in by their bikes or walking, whatever, that would be brilliant.
There's also the businesses that aren't just about commuting. So we've seen a huge rise in deliveries. And I know that there's a supermarket that's trialling walking deliveries within a 15-minute range of their particular supermarket. I don't know if it's happening in Greater Manchester. I'm going to find out. but the last mile delivery options. So making sure that we find ways to build activity into the days of the employees that would otherwise be sat in a vehicle all day. And I think that's also something that can be translated into social care settings. Don't just think the first choice to take people out for the day in those protected environments is to load them into a bus. Let's look at the different types of adapted bikes. Let's utilise our network of Wheels for All centres. Let's work with Cycling UK and other delivery partners to enable people to have a plethora of options, not just that first choice option always being a vehicle. And I think it's vital that we start to look a bit more in a broader sense to try and solve this problem, because it's you know, it's right out there. All these journeys are happening right now, and we need to try and stem them. And in Greater Manchester, by 2040, we want to have no net increase in traffic levels, and that's a huge task.
Yeah. You talked about, I mean, effectively making cycling sexy. And I think the image of cycling has changed, but there is still the mammal thing. And I don't know whether W1A did much for Brompton or not. Did it kind of up the geekery stakes? Or?
Well, I think what's pointed out right at the start is normalising cycling.
Yeah.
I mean, the turning point for me, and this is my claim to shame, was I spent 2 years trying to drive an SUV around Amsterdam, which was bloody idiotic. And it was actually the thing that got me thinking. And so when I came back to the UK, to kind of get into the whole cycling thing. But the one thing that struck you in the Netherlands, people dressed for the destination, not the journey. You know, you didn't see, the only time you ever saw people in Lycra was if they were going on a ride out on the Saturday, and you'd see them first thing in the morning getting out. But otherwise, you know, people just cycled in regular. I got here today dressed like this. I dare say, Aid, you were dressed something like that when you were on the bike? Yes, you didn't change
that shirt would not have survived the fight. No, sorry.
Didn't put Lycra on underneath the trousers or anything like that. It's about this normalisation.
Yeah.
Because, again, tribalism is so toxic. Yeah. We don't talk about busists and trainists. But somehow we talk about drivers and cyclists like they're a different species, and then you get this polarisation of thinking. And the reality is, if you're an idiot in a car, you're going to be an idiot on a bicycle and vice versa. And we shouldn't be kind of getting this football hooligan mentality. So yes, absolutely. Ditch the manimal. Let's never talk about the animals. Let's just have normal people doing normal things on bikes. And the quicker we can do that, the better.
Right, I'm going to take a couple of questions, first of all, from the audience online, and then we'll come out to the audience there. You have to wait. Sorry, Aid. Oh, he's going with the microphone. But anyway, online first. Question here about, and it refers back to the Paris example we were saying, is there a reason why the UK can't replicate the successes across Europe? We've talked about Paris, but also Amsterdam, Berlin, and I'm ashamed to say I can't pronounce this. Is it Ljubljana?
Ljubljana.
Ljubljana, yes.
Right. What is it? Is it a mentality thing in this country, or what?
I think we have a long process of consultation, if I'm honest, and that we need to speed things up. Chris Boardman famously once said we never consulted so highly about adding so many vehicle lanes to things, but we seem to consult incredibly highly and get really bogged down in that kind of thing. So being able to speed up that process would be incredibly useful, because once it's there and people are using it, everyone thinks, why were we so against it in the first place?
Yeah. Anyone else? Go on, Adam.
All I was going to say, that one of the things I've seen is, and when we talk about Amsterdam, and I've only been in this industry 3 years, but I'm a sort of problem solver and really dig deep. You know, Amsterdam and some of those places, and Holland, I lived out in Belgium for a bit, is flat as a pancake. And then you see certain cities where it goes, it's the same. So I think my opinion is electrification is going to make more cities like Amsterdam, because what we don't want to do is you won't turn up like that or like that if you're in a got to do big hill climbs. And it just, you know, a lot of the cities in the UK are hilly. And I think across the world, what we'll see is electrification and making everything, because you can just go up the hill as if it's flat.
Yeah. What about rainy Manchester? Do you know what I mean?
But Holland's rainy, so I think people...
Really wet.
A bike poncho. And
that's not sexy, I don't know what it is.
Well, it's very, and if it's got, you know, if it's got the right colour scheme.
Yeah.
But they use them, and I think the thing about the Netherlands is that people just dress for the right occasion, and you arrive in the destination. Sometimes, you know, an athlete like me will use that journey for training, and people who are training for triathlons and other challenges will use that journey, but that shouldn't be the expected way to travel. And I worked in South Yorkshire prior to moving here to Greater Manchester, and we used our electric bikes frequently, in fact all the time, because the 7 Hills of Sheffield, you quite frankly couldn't get up without it.
Yeah, so sorry, I didn't mean to...
So it just changes the world, and I think that will be one of the things that unlocks. We were just talking about it. I launched, when I came into the bike industry, you know, they're doing an amazing job, and actually to try and recreate something like that is a long thing. Yeah. So we brought sort of, I thought, more like IKEA, or Zara, which is an affordable, beautiful bike. There wasn't, so we've launched simple bikes for the masses, because there just wasn't anything at that level. And that creating an electric bike just changes people. Once they've tried them, and that's the problem, is you get on them and go, wow, this is nice, now the hills don't matter, I'm not going to turn up sweaty. I think that will make probably the biggest change, the electrification of bikes.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, how many people here have tried an electric bike? Yeah, I mean, I think probably, as I say, we have a kind of more engaged audience here in terms of active travel. That's probably not representative of the country as a whole, but they are fabulous, aren't they? If you can afford them, affordability is a big barrier.
That's what we've been working on, is driving the price out of them.
Yeah, yeah. Back to scooters here, just because someone's brought it up. Does the influx of electric rental scooters offer a challenge or a solution to cyclists and other road users?
Ooh, can I have a crack at that one?
Yeah.
When they first came in, there was that kind of knee-jerk negative reaction. Understandably, we saw this potentially. But actually, the more we think about it, the more we think this is great. Because the more people who are using micromobility, and I'll include bicycles and scooters in that category, the more need there will be for better infrastructure, and we'll get into a virtuous cycle. Also, if we want to be slightly salty and cynical about it, we feel that perhaps scooters are for younger people, and they will get to maybe to their 30s and 40s and think, actually, you know, maybe I'll switch to a bike. We don't know. But actually, we're pro, because anything that's getting people out of cars and then using it to transition to a mass transit, be it a train or a bus, get that interchange, that first 1 or 2 miles, or that 1 or 2 mile journey, it's got to be good, because that's reducing the problems with air quality.
My 43-year-old co-presenter uses an electric scooter every day, walks out of the studio and just hops on an electric scooter and says in London, I don't know why there in particular, it's just by far the easiest way to kind of zip along. Well, he's actually a big child, but I suspect there are people in there. Well, no, but we've done actually radio stuff on it before. We've heard from people in their 50s and 60s. And I think a 70-year-old texted us once and said, I don't mean even 70, I just mean it's the older demographic or older than you'd expect, and said, I've got a scooter and I absolutely love it. Just talking about the virtuous circle, I presume, Eunice, that there is an exponential effect, is there? Once you get more cyclists on the road, it feels safer, more people come in. Do you see that in the data that you have? Yeah, no, definitely. And even if you think about COVID, great example of the roads were dead, there was no traffic, we saw a lot more cycles on the road. And I think it was mentioned earlier in one of the other panels, one of the days, the silence of the city and how that was, you know, that was amazing, wasn't it? And we enjoyed that. So, you know, having that on a more continual basis, you know, bikes are still up, looking at the data and stuff like that. So we do need to carry on with this active travel, enjoy the quiet city, and yeah, it is going up that way. Right, I'm going to open things to the floor then. Aid is desperate to ask a question, so we'll give him the microphone first of all, and then we'll pass it around to anyone else.
It's my first question of the summit. Thanks very much indeed for a great panel. Active Travel England has been established this year with a fairly whacking great budget of £2 billion. What does the panel hope and expect from the Active Travel England body?
Go on, James.
Shall I start? Yeah, I think it's great. I think hopefully it will really drive debate. Well, not debate, hopefully it will drive at a local level and empower local authorities to make change and to put that infrastructure in place and to have those cohesive networks that go from A to B into other areas as well. And hopefully it will drive it into the public consciousness that we're taking cycling really, really seriously. And there's a body looking after that there. And they're also going to be policing, that's maybe a strong word, but they're going to be looking after, well, not policing is probably the right word, the cycle infrastructure and making sure it's delivered to a decent quality, that it is properly segregated and it's not just what we call ghost lanes with a paint along the floor, because that doesn't work. So yeah, we definitely welcome it at Cycling UK. Personally, I welcome it. I think it's
How should the money be spent then? Anyone?
It's on delivery. I think that's the delivery, making sure that it's actually implemented. And 2 billion sounds like a lot, but compared to the budget for roads, it's not as big as it could be. And I think we have to look at the value for money, the active travel infrastructure, active travel lanes, and we should always make sure that we always start with walking and making sure it's easier for people to walk, because the vast majority of people, if we can double the amount of walking, that's a lot easier, that's a lot bigger number than if we're double cycling, because we need to double and double again with cycling because the numbers are still incredibly low. So walking is an absolutely vital part, and making sure that when we do other things such as planning, they're going to be a statutory consultee to planning, so that if we're building new things, we always build to the right standard and we never just build for vehicles, because we have to make sure that there are sufficient footways and active travel lanes in all new things that are built. Otherwise, retrofitting costs even more, and that's going to be, you know, long-term issues for budget.
Yeah. Anyone else on that one in particular?
I'll have to take a little bit on that. I think for me it's a couple of things. First thing is it should be tangible, because we see these budgets quite often get watered away by indeterminate amounts on consultations and consultancies, and suddenly there's a lot of talking and not enough doing. So I completely agree that we should see tangible infrastructure and real clear policing, control into local authorities to make sure they're delivering appropriate projects, both hard and soft projects, for cycling and walking as well. But I think, secondly, we need to see some action sooner rather than later, because, you know, we've been talking about things on the horizon across the nation now for many, many, many years, and there's been some good local initiatives done by strong metro mayors, but we need to be seeing that on a national level, and I think this is the body that could achieve that and create a bit of speed across the national platform.
Okay, excellent answers. Just before I go to one I asked, actually, I just want to raise an issue about the technical nature of bikes, and please don't all pile in on me for this, right? So I got a lockdown bike, and then it got a puncture, and I haven't used it since. Now, that is shameful, I know, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, but you need a flipping physics degree to get the front wheel off. Now, that, you know, and I don't want to look like an idiot, so I don't want to be there on the side of the road going, whoa. So how can we simplify that? Anyone?
I think probably
You are looking at me like
we're both probably as businesses. As businesses, we're both looking at it. I was reading their product spec a few days ago, and they've got puncture-resistant tyres, and that's what we're working on. Is we're working with universities on foam fills, different methods of...
Schwab have got some good ones.
Yeah,
the
these
DfT have provided vouchers for people to utilise in local bike shops.
Yes, they have, yeah.
So the £50 vouchers to help people to engage with the process, and a little bit like learning how to change the oil in the vehicle, or learning how to, you know, check the air in the tyres, and the winter check that we're all advised to do with vehicles. With a bike, it's the same process. It's learning how it works, and then learning where to take it when it needs some attention.
Yeah.
And a bike needs a service just like a vehicle does.
Yeah.
So that's what the vouchers were enabled when, I can't remember which year it is because I'm kind of a bit confused about the timescales, but they were announced.
Yeah, yeah, and actually that was a very good kind of, I think a lot of people did take their old bike that's had the puncture in it for several months to the bike shop and did get them up and running again. So that was actually, I think, probably one of those schemes that had immediate impact. Sorry, that's my own personal issue. There's another question up there, is there? The gentleman there. Yeah.
Hi, Mark Atherton, GMCA.
Sorry.
Can I ask a little bit about systemic thinking? I think all of the other panels have talked about a systems-based approach, and I think this panel has a little bit. But what I'm particularly thinking about is the infrastructure that you talked about right at the beginning. So within Greater Manchester, we need active travel networks, that's fine, but we also need biodiversity corridors, and we need sustainable urban drainage, and we need opportunities to get digital networks more established. So what's the opportunity to bring some of these infrastructure types together and deliver a systemic infrastructure system which benefits more than just cyclists?
That's a great question. And yeah, we definitely need to do that. So I think we're facing 4 major issues as a society and globally. That's urbanisation, climate change, ill health, and biodiversity loss. And bringing in cycling corridors can actually help combat a lot of that. So if you make cycle corridors that invite nature back into the cities, it's called biophilic design, you can hit a lot of those things. That helps combat ill health, it helps bring back biodiversity back in, it encourages active travel, it stops people feeling lonely. So that whole systems approach definitely needs to be built into cycle networks and that conducive way of thinking. And it's about different government agencies working together. It's not just the Department for Transport. And they're doing this now. It's about bringing in public health, urban designers, scientists, all coming together to resolve those problems. And you can do that by creating these cycle paths that invite all the, say, nature back in, promoting healthy living instead of ill health. So yeah, it is a systems approach that is definitely needed.
Yeah. Anyone else on that one before we pass it over? I hope that answers, Mark. If you want to come back on that. Yes, of course.
So I accept the answer, but who pays?
Who pays?
Who pays?
Yeah, good. Yeah, Good question. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't got the answer for that one. Well, I think some of it has to sit on government, but I think some of it has to sit with businesses as well. But yeah, that is a good question.
Do you want to bring the mic down this way? We've got a lady in the front first, and then we'll go to the gentleman behind her if we can. So.
I've only got a comment about Mark.
Oh yeah, go on. Yeah, then do you want to do that? Yeah, sure.
I just need to pull up Mark on that last thing. Richard Sully from the South Yorkshire MCA.
Hi.
Cycle lanes don't benefit cyclists. You don't build cycle lanes for cyclists, you build cycle lanes for society. So you want to get people out of cars, so car drivers benefit from cycle lanes, and the environment benefits from cycle lanes, and school kids benefit from being cleaner air from cycle lanes. That was it.
It's a really good point, and I'm going to use that the next time we have a debate about this on the radio. For every cyclist you see, it's a benefit to a driver, because it's such a toxic argument, that one, isn't it? Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay from GreenTV Media. So I want to touch on safety. You've all kind of mentioned it at the beginning, and I feel like we've not really got into it. So I'm a keen cyclist, or was until 3 years ago. I got knocked off my bike in London. Eunice, I don't know if you know the statistics and the data around more cyclists on the road. Does this mean more accidents? And what are we doing safety-wise? I mean, Volta Trucks are developing this amazing 180 cab where they can see the road at street level. You know, what other solutions are there to safety to get people like me back on the roads on my bike, which I love?
I know that you'll want to say something about that, Sarah, but Eunice, on the data.
Yeah, I mean, we're still collecting a lot of data, so it's early days for us to be able to get that kind of granularity. But I know we were talking earlier about the guys were looking at how they can make more clothing for cyclists, because safety is a big thing, isn't it? You're absolutely right. If you don't feel safe in the environment, are you going to even walk, let alone take your bike? So how can we make that better? So I think it's for businesses and government to tackle that as well. But I don't know if you want to mention about what you were doing about safety in your product lines.
I'd actually more talk about, it's a back-to-front starting point, because much as improvements in clothing safety and bicycles and all that, that's victim shaming. It's implying it was your fault for not wearing a high-vis jacket or the right thing. Exactly. I mean, to be honest, you could have a flashing light on top of your head and you still get knocked off sometimes. The fact is, if you go to the countries where cycling is perceived as safe, it's because the hierarchy goes, as it's technically now in our highway code, pedestrians, cyclists, etc., etc. The reality is still, if you step across the crossroads at the moment as a pedestrian in front of a car, you will get an earful, because there's still the perception is still cars first. The roads are built around the car. Cycle lanes are built alongside. You know, they're an afterthought. So in terms of safety, number one, an absolute cultural shift away from this mentality that it was your fault you got knocked off the bike. And I think the second thing is proper segregated cycling in the short to medium term, until we can get that societal change.
What, sorry, Julian?
Segregated cycling.
Segregated cycling, which is where you're talking about cycle lanes that aren't just a line on the road. Yeah.
Until we can get that societal change.
Yeah.
We shouldn't need them. If you cycle around Amsterdam, actually the reality is there's very little segregated cycling, but there's also very little car versus bicycle.
But a completely different culture.
Exactly.
And it's about making sure that we see it as socially unacceptable to drive a vehicle in that aggressive manner in the first place. So the greatest threat of harm is the person driving the vehicle, therefore they need to take the greatest care in that built environment. And it's the systems approach again, where we're building places for people first, people walking, people cycling. As a person on a bike, I need to look out for pedestrians stepping into the road just as much as a person, but more that the vehicle driver has to do more so, because they're much more likely to do more harm. So it's really, really vital that we as a society, like Julian says, see antisocial driving as the big problem, because that's ultimately what caused your incident. And it's not an accident, it's a collision. And we've got to also change our language. We need to talk about collisions. We need to talk about drivers hitting people, not cars hitting people.
Right, I think we probably have time for one more. Yes, sir.
Just me, okay. I'm actually Dutch. And I own 5 bikes.
Is that normal?
That's quite normal. That is normal. And I cycle about 5 to 6,000 miles a year for fun. It's not to the office. There is a bike garage at the office, so I can store the bikes, not a problem. Actually, the AA in Holland will fix your flat tire if you want to.
That's what I need.
It costs you nothing. You just need to subscribe. So there's very little obstacles for me to go to the office yet. The cars are comfortable. I don't want to be exposed to the to the weather. I wear a suit to the office every day, and I can't see myself on a bicycle, although I love cycling. So is there a means of transport that looks like a bicycle that I'm overlooking?
Go for Sarah's cape.
I've seen those.
I don't know. Hey.
Sostrans, the National Cycling NGO, suggests, and this data is about 20 years old, that on any given year, there are only 12 cycling journeys to work that you actually get rained on, statistically, here in the UK. So I think it might be a perception issue for you rather than a meteorological one.
I might have an answer.
Go on.
Take a folding bike. When it's dry, you cycle. When it's wet, you fold it up and you take a taxi home. There you are.
Train.
Or a train, or a bus,
or a tram.
Anything.
They're in Manchester.
I think
if you're doing 99% of your journeys on a bike, I'll take the odd journey in a taxi.
Go on, Adam, yeah.
I think that point, maybe because I tried to turn pro as a cyclist many years ago and had a long time out of the industry. Coming back into it, we've been doing lots of studies of why people don't cycle, and that so probably one of the biggest barriers is clothing and those sorts of things. And therefore, again, we can build a lot of cycle lanes, but again, when they're talking like what can you get for 2 billion, my answer is going to be we should get every single person in Britain riding a bike every day, because that's a lot of money. But things like clothing, if you spent £1 million invested into building decent clothing into a clothing business, that probably be enough to come up with something. We're saying we're looking at stuff with integrated lights, so you've got indicators, and that's safety is what puts a lot of people off, and then the weather.
The thing that puts people off is having to need specialist clothing. So we've also got to be always very, very aware that we don't come back on ourselves and cause another problem.
But I don't
we
think
also
being
cause them active travel lanes to enable us to talk about other micromobility solutions, such as the scooters, which fold really easily and can tuck under your desk a little bit more easily than a bike and are a little bit lighter. So it's really, really important that we keep it as simple as possible, because at the end of the day, active travel is the simplest way of getting around.
Yeah.
But how do you, so just going back to clothing, if somebody chooses to dress smart or wear a suit, that puts a lot of people off. And you're saying about not having it, but again, I had a coat. I had a waterproof, I didn't know it was not waterproof, but I had a coat today because I thought it might rain. So I, even though I'm a walker, have made a decision to bring a coat, because I didn't want my jacket, just now because it's too hot to go over there. But I didn't want to, and therefore I don't think it's unreasonable, just because we do as walkers, we would wear specialist clothing when it's wet. There's no reason for bicycle or cyclists or scooter riders to also have specialist. I get, our whole target, we're probably, again, going back to the bicycle industry and safety, it's most of the money in the industry has gone into...
But then maybe it's about changing the expectations of how you turn up to work,
But a coat and a scooter would work just as well. And then, because people may well be put off by an indicator in a jacket. So I was just trying to make sure that we can keep it as simple as we can and utilise what's available without having to say you need something special because you're going to get on a bike, because that's half of our challenge in getting people on a bike at the moment, is that people perceive that there's specialist stuff needed.
Truth is, we're working on it.
You just need to stick an influencer and shove a cape on him or her and, gossip it. We have to draw it to a close. But before we do, I know one of the consistent themes we've had through the last couple of days has been about this sense of urgency. There's no point talking about what we need to do in the future, or 10 years down the line, or 5 years down the line, or 2 years down the line. It has to begin now. So just very quickly, and this is a hard thing to ask of all of you, if you could do something now, tomorrow, what would it be? Sarah?
1 day a month, let's have just a walking day. Everybody walks everywhere.
Brilliant. Why not? Have you suggested it? Have you... Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, yeah, some places have bike days.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it as simple as we can and make walking. When Chris Whitty stood on that platform in the coronavirus pandemic and said, there is nobody who wouldn't benefit from taking a walk, that walk might be just from here to those chairs, depending on the health circumstance of that person. But a daily walk massively changes your health outcomes and changes the way you are. And we talked about having meetings walking during the pandemic so that we could get out of the house because we're working from home. And it's so vital that we never forget just how powerful a walk is.
Brilliant. Julian?
I'd like to see many more programmes where people get to experiment with cycling. We did Wheels for Heroes with the NHS, and off the back of that, 1 in 5 permanently converted to cycling as a mode of transport, just because they had access to try a bike for free for 3 months and self-converted, bums on bike.
And that's a very good conversion rate, actually.
Yeah, and just get people on bikes and they'll figure it out for themselves. If it's not for them, it's not for them. But at least we get them trying it.
James?
Quick win. I think it's in Colombia. They shut the road for yeah, that's it. Thank you. Yeah, for 1 day a month, a weekend, and everyone comes out and uses their bikes, and then they can see the beauty of the bikes and how they can travel around their city sustainably. Cities should be doing that in the UK. 1 day a month, close all the roads, and let people travel actively.
Adam.
So mine was going to be the same as Julian's. But the other thing, so I don't think it's really important to do that one, but also that the undercurrent scooter trial rules, we could be running long-term private rentals, that all our scooters comply with all the regs of the scooter trials. And therefore, if you want to take, you can, under the current regulations, allow 80% of the people that come into our shop leave and won't ride a scooter because it's illegal to ride it on the road, and their carers, teachers, nurses, doing something about those rules and allowing scooters on the road now. We've got a system to do that.
Okay. Final thought to you, Eunice.
Communication and collaboration, which I think has been, for me, a key through the 2 days. You know, there's lots of lovely user cases, there's lots of tips that people have picked up, but how is that communicated and how do we work together? We're not going to do it in isolation, so those 2 things are key for me.
Well, what a brilliant thought to end on, because hopefully that has been, well, part of the mission statement of the last couple of days. Thank you so much to all of you for being part of our final panel this afternoon, and thank you very much to everyone who, as I say, has formed the elite part of the final audience here at the Decarbonisation Summit. So we are going to exit the stage and allow A to say a final few words, but a final thank you to our guests.